Language learner. In this video, we're going to talk about what do language learners do, but in relation to my previous video, this is particularly focused on independent learning. So let's dive right in. Watch that video if you haven't watched it yet. So in this episode, we are going to focus about learning independently. And for a language learner, this is very important because particularly now, actually, at the moment I was recording this video, half of the entire world's schools are actually closed due to the coronavirus or COVID-19. So what advice do I have you as a teacher of 10 years experience to tell you what do you need to do to keep your language skills up as a language learner? So first of all, I think it's important to know about how new language content is learned effectively. And you may have come across this curve. It's basically as soon as, for example, if you learn 15 words or 10 words in a foreign language, as soon as you spend a little bit of an amount of time, maybe a couple hours, maybe 6 hours later, you would probably remember only 50%, at which point you need a little bit of a top up. So you can look at those words again, so you can get to know them 100%. And then your brains, naturally, if you watch the sentence video I recommended you last video, then you will understand that you start forgetting again those words. So the only way that you can increase your learning curve, which is the green curve that we've got on the screen, then you've got to, at regular interval, review those vocabulary items, which is very important for you to get the better retention of the information. By the fifth review, as you can see on the screen here, you've got a good understanding and a good ability to recall information and therefore less forgetting. So what does that mean for language learners, particularly now if you're learning from home? Well, what it means that you need to go over the stuff that you've done in the previous years or in the last couple of months and try to reacquaint yourself with the vocabulary, but the grammar structures, and that works for pretty much anything related to learning a foreign language. Okay, so one thing that is also very important in my views is you have to understand as an independent language learner what you're good at and what you're not good at. So what you've got to be understanding about this is that you need to be good at reviewing previous things that you've done. So if you're lucky enough to have a teacher, or if you know that you have written some things in that language, the first step is to look and go over your past work and understand whether it is accurate or not. Sometimes if you use web tools such as Duolingo or Quizlet, for example, online, which are great websites, then that gives you the feedback immediately. You can know what you got right or wrong, which is great. But sometimes when we speak a language, I've got no one to tell us that. So we've got to go with that. So this is usually the advice I give to my students. So go over the past work and observe patterns and recurring issues, particularly if something has been marked by one of your teachers, if you're lucky enough. Or what does Duolingo tell you to correct all the time that you always make this type of mistakes? Think about whether it's a pressing aspect or not. Sometimes there are things that are important and something that are not really important. And that is where sometimes having a teacher is really helpful, because Duolingo can't really tell you about that. But sometimes you know that whether the person is going to be able to understand you or not to understand you at all, that's going to be making it pretty important on your priority list. You also need to be aware about what your issues in terms, what type of words are you getting wrong? Are you saying things that don't make sense to a native speaker of that language, for French, for example, or Spanish, Italian, who knows? How will you know that you have solved the problem? And that's often something that is important. Sometimes you know that you're not really good at learning the colors, and when you're learning the colors, you keep messing the words around in the wrong order. So what do you need to know to make sure that your brain takes on board that you must not do that? So probably it's about repetition. Probably it's also to be aware about the problem in the first place, hence my second bullet point. Then once you think you've got an idea about what your problems are, you can start thinking about solving them. So you need to practice and reflect and to verify whether your approach is actually solving the problem and you're getting better at it. And that is where sometimes you need to test yourself and have a think about whether what you've tried is actually working. And sometimes you need to wait for a long time before things are working out. Something that I've found to work very well is that if I've got a text, for example, here, that has been marked by my teacher, I can go over the type of things that have been corrected by them, and then I can see that I've made some mistakes. Then I can reflect on my writing skills, and I can see that I've got some issues about the word order. And I think the issue arises from the fact that the word order in French and in English are pretty different. So what I've decided to do for myself there is to actually start practicing and writing and translating and double check them with a translator. But you've been probably told not to use a translator. You can. You could, for example, I'm talking to you in English. I could decide to write it in French without the translator, and then checking that French makes sense within a translator, translating it back, my French back to English. That's how I know that I can speak French, by the way. So that's I can also, that's a joke. Look at the other problem. So making a table like you've got on the screen there with the skill that you're practicing, what the problem is, and also maybe the idea why you think this is going wrong, and a tip on how you can solve that issue really personally helps me to understand what I need to solve as a problem. And that's kind of very important. We're almost done here, so stick around. If you enjoyed this video so far, just give it a thumbs up. Please share with your friends if you think it's good. The last bit is you need to improve grammar skills. Grammar works along with language learning. Some people would argue that you don't really need grammar to learn a language, and I would agree. But in fact, I think some elements of understanding your own language grammatically and being able to understand how it works in other languages often really helps. Of course, if you're in the country, you can learn things really quickly by understanding how it works, and you can learn without knowing the grammar rules. But for most of the people who are learning a foreign languages, sometimes they don't do that in the actual country. So that leads to the problem and trying to get to why it's important for you to learn grammar. So grammar is the mathematics of language. So you've got to understand how it works. And there are plenty of websites that you can find. In fact, you've got some lists that I've put on my website here and there as well. It's often good when you read a grammar lesson is to read and try to understand what it means. And sometimes some of them are a little bit more complex and too confusing for you. Or maybe it's not really your level. Maybe it's talking about something that you're really advanced type of French, like the subjunctive. Maybe that's not you, and therefore you don't understand. Maybe leave it on the side. But before you put it on the side, I would advise you to look at 3 different websites and see what they say about the same thing, the same topic. The problem with grammar is that you've got to learn the language of grammar, like what is an adjective, what is a verb, what is a pronoun, and what does it do, a determinant or adjective. They are the same thing. Oh well, actually, that's fairly complicated, so we'll talk about that when we talk about syntax in another video. So read those, look at those lessons you've got, and think about what are my issues with this, how can it be solved, again, same approach as before. And how will you know that you've mastered that grammar point? So are you going to test yourself once you've read about it to understand that whether you've understood or you think you've understood, because those things are 2 different things. And then also remember that if you look at that grammar point now and don't do anything about it for 6 months, then probably you won't remember it. So you also need to revisit those, and that's quite hard. So we'll give you some tips about this in the next video, which is all about revision tips. How do you go, once you know how to solve your problems, how do you go about it to be able to actually review and make sure you consolidate the information you've learned. So see you in the next video. Hopefully you're still with us, and hopefully this is useful in the current times, but hopefully this is also useful in the future.